Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here on DZRJ and RJ TV. My name is Lecain, and I am joined, as always, with the fabulous 𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀.
Hello, Eric. Hello, everyone.
How was your week, 𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀?
Oh, Eric, it's a great week with a great news around the world.
Actually, we here on the World News Jam, we talk about stories going on around the world, some of the most interesting things that I think that you would be interested in too. But before we get to this, now, Lolly, this is going to be a very tough show to get through today, but before we get to that, I wanted to talk about some good news. You know, the Asia Games have been going on there, and the Philippines have been getting some medals. Of course, basketball, which was one of the big impressive medals. They got the gold medal. But the one thing that I was just fascinated by on this Asia Games, and it popped up on my Facebook the other day, and I watched it, this girl explaining about her situation and being at the Asia Games and how she had to fight through the pain and the anguish and all the stuff that she had to go through. You know, the women's jiu-jitsu, and I don't know if you watch a lot of jiu-jitsu. You know, I watched it a little bit, but boy, the women's jiu-jitsu, 48 kilograms, 56 kilograms, they won the gold medal.
Oh, really?
In both. It was really something. I watched the fights against the UAE and Kazakhstan, and honestly, I don't. It's hard to understand jiu-jitsu sometimes. Like, how do you score? Because it's one of those combat sports where you don't actually punch or kick. You just kind of roll around on the floor, grab your opponent's shirt, pull, tug, flip, pull, tug a little more. It's almost like chess sometimes, the way they do it. I've watched a lot of men's jiu-jitsu, which is a lot of big, powerful men, and they, you know, submit each other and choke each other out. But the women's jiu-jitsu is a little different. They just, like I said, they roll around on the floor a lot, trying to get a better position, and the Filipino girls just had better positions.
Oh, really?
And they didn't necessarily score any points against each other, but they held the dominant position all the time. So I don't know sometimes how they judge these things, but in any case, the Filipino women did very well
Okay.
in the games there in the jiu-jitsu. So we congratulate them.
It's not the thing that I really don't watch that, so that's why because I'm not interested. It's not, maybe not me, because I watch other, other sports, so not with this. I don't know.
I have to say, I don't
like.
completely understand jiu-jitsu exactly. I mean, it's not like Taekwondo, where if you kick a guy in the head, you get a point. This one is very strategic, and they, it's you hear the announcers and they're so excited about something, and you're looking at it going, "What happened? What happened? I didn't see it." But anyway, I'm sure it's a very compelling sport there.
Well, congratulations to them, for bringing the gold medal.
Yes, I mean that's quite an endeavor. I think the Philippines, they got 4. In total,
already?
Because remember we talked about the high jumper, who's one of our favorite guys to talk about, and I think the basketball team, they also got a gold medal. So Philippines doing okay there at the Asia Games. But now I wanted to get to some interesting stories that happened this week. I wanted to talk first off about something that happened back in 2022. Just to kind of get things rolling, there was a video that came out that I saw this week I'd never seen before that shows Hamas fighters. Now, we know about Hamas, of course, and they were surrounding a building with military weapons and shooting rockets, and they were capturing what looked like Israeli prisoners. But it turns out that these were not Israeli prisoners. They were Hamas acting like Israeli hostages. And it was a video of a training exercise in an area that made it look like the Ezra Crossing, which is the pedestrian passageway between Gaza and Israel, which we've been talking about a lot on the news. This video was a mock-up site used to train for a future mission, a mission in which Hamas rebels would cross into Israel, killing and kidnapping as many citizens as they could, and yet there is still another training video that also came out, which shows Hamas fighters taking off and landing with paraglider equipment that you might see in a Tom Cruise movie, strapped to their bodies, jumping off a thing and then gliding. At the time, it seemed kind of odd that Hamas fighters would be messing around with paraglider equipment. And it seems that these military training videos have been taking place over a span of 2 years in 6 different sites in Gaza, and they know all this because of satellite imagery. They can look down and see these guys training. Now, as we know, all that training that Hamas did turned out to be what they needed to do in order to breach one of the most military guarded countries in the world, of course, that being Israel. And last Saturday, as we reported right here, Hamas was able to breach that border of Israel and do one of the most horrific acts of war the modern world has seen in quite some time. But what's so different about this particular one was that Hamas targeted children and even babies and family members who were beheaded in front of each other family members. And if you've ever seen a beheading with a knife, let me just say it sticks in your memory for a while. But what is so shocking to me, and has many people scratching their head about this attack on the civilian population of Israel, is how could this have ever happened in the first place? How could one of the most protected countries in one of the most sophisticated intelligence agencies not see this coming? How could they not know? I think is a question that we just have to ask. So I know we want to get to some of the other issues, some of the other things that are going on, but that was one of the things that just kept popping into my head, is how could all this be happening, and how could they walk 1,500 militant Hamas get across the border into Israel without them knowing about it?
Well, the very first thing in my mind when I heard about that is that lack of intelligence report, because normally you have intelligence, right? So that goes around, check it out, what's going on, what's going to happen. Remember, but for this particular thing happened in that area. I mean, I was also shocked. I mean, like, why?
They're one of the most sophisticated intelligence agencies in the world.
Exactly. So why did they miss this one? Or they're not really expecting. They're probably so relaxed. Nothing will happen. We're just okay, But this is the thing that I always say. If it is so quiet, you must be wondering why. Especially in this is Israel and the Hamas or the Gaza thing. This is what happened, right? Even here locally, sometimes, because I have probably a little training on the this kind of job, so I would really wonder. This is just like friends, right? Like you and I. If Eric, if I did not hear from you for a week, I did not see you, whatever, I might wonder what's happening with Eric, what's wrong with him. So I applied this, thinking to this also. What happened? Is there any, why are they so, so comfortable with the situation?
I started to think about this because, it's just one of those things that you just have to look at this, and everybody was like, how could this possibly happen in a country like Israel? And I started thinking, looking back at times like when this happened in history, 1941 in Hawaii, in Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese attacked, when they had the kamikaze planes that flew into all the things. The thing that was, Americans had actually cracked the Japanese code before the attack and had intercepted scores of messages. In other words, they knew. However, they did not take steps in order to stop this from happening. And this is the same thing. If you look back at 9/11, when the planes were flown into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the U.S. intelligence knew it was coming. It turns out they knew a whole lot more about that attack than we originally thought, especially, of course, the Arabic-speaking men who were in the U.S. telling the pilot teachers, hey, we just want to learn how to fly. We don't need to learn how to land. But in reality, the intelligence community knew there was something big coming. And there was a CIA intelligence report shown to the White House on August 6th, more than a month before September 11th. And in the title of the report, it was called Bin Laden Determined to Strike in USA. But it turns out many months before, the CIA urgently was warning the White House about an impending attack, that al-Qaeda camps were closing up. Known terrorists were going into hiding. You were just talking about, like me not calling you. The CIA knew something big was coming. However, the U.S. government pretty much ignored them. And why did they ignore it? Well, you know, many believe, of course now here we're going to get into conspiracy theories, that George Bush at the time was one of the most unpopular presidents in history, but somehow after 9/11, his popularity went from the 40s to the 86th percent level. Then, of course, his approval went back down to the 20s. But, I don't know, it makes you think sometimes how the U.S. knew that that was going to happen. And Israel was attacked last Saturday, October 7th, by Hamas. But it turns out on October 6th, the U.S. had circulated a report that there was unusual activity by Hamas and that the intelligence indicated that an attack was imminent. But then it turns out, more information came out, September 28th. That's more than 10 days, almost 10 days before, another report was issued that Hamas was planning a rocket attack across the border very soon. So if the U.S. intelligence was able to get all this info on the attack, what was Israel getting?
Yeah, that's a big question.
I mean yeah, you know, was Israel thinking what you were saying just a minute ago? Like, oh, it's another attack.
Yeah.
All right, nothing new.
Yeah.
Hamas attacks us all the time.
Yeah.
You know, there was one other thing that an Arab diplomat, I found this out, said weeks before, that there were arms that exist in Gaza that are beyond what anyone could imagine that they would have been able to get. Like, they had found out through their intelligence that there were so many missiles stored in Gaza that, you know, they thought that there was maybe 30 or 40, not 7,000. And so, like I said, did Israeli simply just not believe that all this firepower could exist?
Well, you know, okay, let me cut you there, Eric. I think maybe they did not believe that also. Maybe they were thinking, don't worry, it's like here, oh, it's just a chismis. So you don't believe it right away. But the thing is, you know, if there's a talk about something, you need to, you know, you have to think twice, like, is it really true? Let's find out. I mean, if I am in that position, I'll try to find out if there's, even though it could be wrong, but at least. And look what happened.
They had training camps. They had training camps at 6 different sites. One of the training camps was a mile away from the border. And, you know, Egypt is saying, hey, listen, we told the Israelis that something was going to happen 3 days before it actually did. And, of course, Netanyahu, he came on and he said, it's all fake news, which very few believe, because it doesn't really matter, though, because as long as the Israelis believe it, who he was talking to. But, you know, Netanyahu, you know, I have to say, over the last while, he's had a big, you know, corruption case against him, and that's even on the horizon. And before this attack, his polling numbers were 47%. Now, here again, you know, this is just, you know, watching the news, and this keeps coming up, that he's been in a lot of trouble lately. And now, one of the biggest stories in Israel is now kind of taking us off of that. You know, he's now in a different place, especially, you know, very similar to the way, you know, what George Bush said. You know, Netanyahu is now saying he's going to crush his enemy. You know, don't look at my corruption case anymore. Right now, we're focused on the enemy, Gaza. And, you know, the Israeli people, supposedly, according to polls, have somewhat forgotten about the fraud and robbery that have been charged with, because they're being attacked.
But Eric, if you're at war, I mean, forget about politics. all you need to do is do what is right. Do the right thing. You need to be friends with all the presidents in the world, especially United States, the European, countries and all that, because you need help here. Though you have all the, you have all the ammunition that you can ask for, but then in this kind of war, I mean, there's a lot of help that they need, especially the humanitarian. This is very important. It's not only the weapon that they need. It's not only the rockets or whatever. You need to save people's lives as well. How are you going? Because you cannot just attack one area because there's a lot of innocent civilian.
Did you hear Netanyahu speak? He's not talking about humanitarian stuff. He's talking about flattening Gaza.
Well, that's
like completely taking out the entire
Of course, he has
area.
to say that. He has to say that because if you are the leader of your country, you need to be firm on something. Oh, the humanitarian part will come from, it came from another countries that, okay, we, like the U.S., okay, we have to do the humanitarian side because, the U.S. cannot do the attack, right? Because it's against the war law. You cannot do that.
This is, there's going to be a massive humanitarian issue because, 1 million people are getting displaced.
Oh, yes.
But, it's interesting, I think, because Hamas came in and, they targeted civilians. They targeted babies and children. And what happened was Israel turned around. They killed how many hundreds of Israelis, over 1,000. And then what happened, right after Israel turned around and just, fired missiles right into Gaza, just, killing thousands of Palestinians.
Yeah.
Are all those Palestinians that they killed Hamas fighters? Are any of them Hamas fighters? Hamas is a very clever group. They know how to use human shields.
Yeah.
That's why they got all those hostages.
Yeah, that's
They're
why.
going to say, hey, we put all these hostages in this building. You kill us, you're going to kill your people too.
Yeah, exactly. But always remember, Eric, when it's war time, first they use, aside from the they use human shield. They will use it. And remember, even way back during the, and the killing will always be there. No, I just feel bad for all the people who got killed, innocent people killed in a war like this. My grandfather was killed during the war. And, we're talking about the Japanese, Japanese time. He was killed. So, my heart goes to those people who are innocent.
Was your grandfather fighting against the Japanese?
Yes. He was, my
right.
father was with the U.S.
I understand when soldiers get killed. It's a war. That's it's us against them. But here again, we have all these rules of war, which these guys don't follow anymore.
They don't.
And the reason that they don't follow, Hamas, and we've talked about them before. They want to, they want to kill all the Jews. They want to wipe them off the face of the planet. Mm-hmm. The same way the Nazis did.
Yes.
It's been going on for 100 years.
Yes.
We can even go back thousands of years.
Yeah, exactly. It happens.
People, because of religious reasons or whatever reasons, the Jews as an ethnicity have been one of the most hated people in history. And, part of the reason why this fire has been fueled for so long, and you talk to children, you have interviews with these children, these Palestinian children, and they're asking about the Israelis. What do you think of the Israelis? We hate the Israelis. We wish they would all die. Why do you believe that? It's because they've been killing us for so long. And so that's, Hamas's, what they have is their reason. Well, they've been killing us for so long, so we went in and killed them. And Hamas knew. They knew what they were doing. They went in and they did, if you've seen the pictures, I'm not saying that you should look at them because they are pretty bad. They're pretty horrific. But what they did was the worst thing that I have seen in a long time, because they knew what was going to happen was Israel was going to turn around and just, fire missiles right into Gaza and kill lots of people.
Oh, yeah.
And what is going to happen now? Well, now the rest of the world has to pick sides.
Yes.
And if you're on the Muslim side and you've been seeing the poor Palestinian people being killed for so many years, and now all of a sudden, Israel comes in and they're, just blowing up buildings left and right, and they're telling the Palestinians they have 6 hours to leave.
Yeah.
And go where? They're not even sure where they're going to go. And now all the Palestinians that are stuck there, they have cut off food supplies. They have cut off water supplies. They've cut off everything. So now watch what happens. You're going to start having, instead of having videos of, children burned that the Hamas did, you're going to have, pictures of children starving to death. I mean, this is one of the things that they know. This is a plan. They knew this is going to play. And that way, it's going to give reasons for places like Iran and other, Muslim countries to also, gather together, which means that there's going to be Western countries that are gathering together behind Israel. And before you know it, everybody's going to get behind each other. And then what's going to happen?
Well, it's really bad to hear this story, but it is happening, and the war would always. This is one thing that I always said. I don't want to see a war in my own land. So, I mean, just hearing the story of the Palestinian. I have a lot of Palestinian friends. I was in Jordan for 4 years on the 80s, and a lot of good Palestinian. And this thing that we're talking about are Hamas. They're the one that is, very much involved. They're the one that do the killing. So, I mean, there's a lot of good people, and I just don't understand why this story, this is happening. Why don't we just love each other? Why are we killing each other?
Yeah, we've been asking that question for 10,000 years.
Exactly. So now,
why do we have
Eric,
war?
do you think we need to change leaders? Not only, because it's a long story. It's a long debate.
We did change leaders. We changed leaders in
We
Gaza.
do.
We changed the leaders from who they had to Hamas. They voted those people in. Those people now lead that area. And so, here again, they lead that, the same way that Netanyahu got able to get back into office. I will protect you, I will protect you from the enemy. Hamas, we will protect you from the enemy. That's a lot of this hard right-wing conservatism is how a lot of these people are getting into the position of power. And I think that is something that has been kind of going on in the world, not so much even in these places, these hotspots in those areas. And here again, what are we fighting over? We're fighting over a piece of desert where you can't even grow anything but a fig.
Yeah.
And I understand a little bit the plight of the Palestinians and why they are so angry and why they've been so angry for so long. They believe this land is theirs.
Yeah.
They believe that eventually they will be pushed out completely from their heritage because, that is the spoils of war. The Israelis have the biggest guns. And so they have been able to hold power over the Palestinians for years. And now all of a sudden this happens where how Hamas got that many missiles and were able to fire so many of them.
Yeah.
It was incredible to watch all these, missiles, and then you've got those
like a fireworks.
anti-missile flying everywhere.
Yeah.
So Israel has said, all right, listen, we are going to completely take back Gaza. I'm sure the Hamas thought ahead that they knew this was going to. So Israelis, they'll kill 5,000, 10,000 Palestinians. Did they win? Did Hamas win? Did Iran win? Mm-hmm. Who's actually going to win when they kill all these Palestinians?
Yeah.
I think it's over as far as the major, massive warfare of them shooting missiles over the border. I think that might be done. But what I think is going to happen, and we can talk about this every week and keep updating everybody, but I think what's going to happen is Israel is going to send in ground troops, and that's exactly what they want.
That's the plan. That's the next move.
They want them to come in, because once they get in there, boy, Gaza has something like how many miles of tunnels running underneath it, like going this way and that way. The Hamas, they know this place so well. They can put hostages right where they want them, and then there's tunnels underneath that they can run everywhere. They can come up behind them. I mean, it's incredible what they have already been saying about Gaza that we didn't even know before. And I think that is probably what's coming next. And those kind of wars go on for years. These ground wars. Yes, they can completely wipe Gaza off the face of the map. I mean, Israel has very sophisticated weapons. For what purpose? To kill all the Palestinians that are there. Palestinians can't get out. They're stuck. I mean, 6 hours to move 1 million people. So a lot of them are stuck there. People on the phone saying, you know, I'm probably not going to survive this because we can't get, there's nowhere to go. So I wonder, like, you know, every week people say, well, it's going to be over very fast. But we say that all the time about these wars, and they're not ever over very fast.
And you know, Eric, the other thing that, you know, like when you heard with those girls, the little girls, Palestinians saying, the little girls saying that, you know, oh, because they're killing us, they, you know, things like that. So, and they were, of course, it's already in their mind that Israelis are bad people, things like that. So at the early age of those children, there's already hatred. So that hatred goes a long way. So probably, you know, those Palestinians are older now, they have that kind of heart too, the hatred. And, you know, of course I don't blame them because that's the thing. They experience that, or their parents experience that, so they pass it on to their, you know, to their children, and now to the little kids. So when will this end? I mean, you started this war, and this war has been, I mean, there for how long, Eric? How long now?
It's been going on for a very long time.
Yeah, so, but this is really...
I mean, you know, when I was a kid, you know, American Indians were always the enemy because we grew up watching television shows where the cowboys, the good guys, fought the Indians. And, you know, it's not when you get a little bit older, you're like, oh, my goodness, you know, the Indians were actually we were the ones that, you know, killed, you know, millions of Indians. And it's the same way, you know, that they look at it. They look at it the same way. You know, they grow up, I mean, most of the children have grown up being killed by Israelis. You know, they have somebody, an aunt, an uncle. Just in the last couple days, 2,215 people were killed by Israeli missiles. 724 of those were children. So I understand, you know, why everybody is calling, you know, Hamas is the enemy. Well, yeah. I mean, what they did in Ezra and what they did at that music concert was something I have never seen before. I've never seen war like that before. But, you know, here again, we have to take a step back and look at the picture of why this war is happening in the first place.
Yeah, that is, I don't know how to answer some question also in my mind.
I mean, the biggest losers in this war are going to be the teachers and the taxi drivers and the plumbers and construction workers and the mothers and the fathers and the sisters and the nieces and nephews, just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And every few years in Israel, you know, they have one of these things. And every time this happens, we always say, oh, wow, this one's something different, like we've never seen before. That's what we always say. And that's what we're saying again. In the last one that happened, where they had the 50 Days War. Oh, my goodness, this is the worst thing we've ever seen. And now we're saying it again.
Yeah. I hope there will be change of heart and mind of those people in that area.
Well,
because if if hatred will always be there, this will be a continuous, you know.
It's the way humans are made. I mean, there's always going to be that. There's always going to be the want to fight. And it's just unfortunate that, like, every president in the United States always has a solution. They all have a solution for the Middle East. The problems between the Palestinians and Israelis, they are going to solve it.
Yeah, the
And
problem
so far
nobody's...
we are, for how many presidents have we had? It's just, you know.
Well, A little, okay, before we change to a different topic, Eric, okay, if I remember it correct, I want to go back to the history of the Philippines. Like, during the Second World War, I mean, when my grandfather was killed by the Japanese, okay. For a long time, remember, there's a story, I'm sure you heard about the comfort women being used by the Japanese. So there's some hatred also among Filipinos to Japanese, what happened to our grandparents and all that. But for so many years now, I praise and thank God that is somehow over. I mean, we have forgiven and forgotten, not really forgot what happened, but then there's, now Japan and Philippines are close ally. They're being good friends. So I just hope it will happen also in that part of the world.
I mean, when my grandmother was young, they hated the Japanese. They hated them so bad. If a Japanese walked across the street, they would have pulled out a gun and just shot them right there. That's how much they hated the Japanese. And now, we can't even fathom that now. The Japanese are our friends. We love the Japanese. They have Sony televisions.
Yeah.
I mean, we like Japanese. The Germans, you know how much we hated the Germans? And now we're very good friends with the Germans.
Exactly. And I really hope this will happen to these two countries, because nobody will benefit from this one.
Like I said, only people that are going to benefit from this war are the Iranians. I hate to say that, but I think it's true. They're the ones that are going to benefit the most from this, because they're the ones that are supplying all the weapons to Hamas. And maybe the president of Netanyahu, but that's just my own conspiracy here. But we will report on this again, I'm sure, next week, because I'm sure this thing is going to continue, and it's probably going to worsen before it gets better. Yeah. Which does bring us to another story. And this is just something a story that I wanted to ask, to say it, see what your opinion was of this, Lolly, because here again, it's very similar. We know, obviously, that the Russians did invade the Ukraine. Ukrainians and their president vowed to never stop fighting for their land. However, not every Ukrainian thinks this way. And this is something I want to talk about this week. Some Ukrainians actually welcome the Russians. And I have been watching this story progress over the last 6 months. And then there was a story that came out just this past week, and I wanted to tell it. In the U.S., we have the same thing. We have people in the U.S. that think Putin is a better leader than Joe Biden. Everybody has their opinion these days. So forth. But, as I've said before, some would rather have a murderous dictator than an old man who can't ride a bicycle. Anyway, so last year, the Russians occupied this part of the Ukraine called _ฎ. They overran the village, and they just moved in, and they took over people's homes. They stole their cars. They demanded the residents give them vodka. It was just a town of civilians. Rose-covered houses, vegetable gardens, honking geese, one of those kind of towns. Many there hated the Russians for coming into their town, but at the time there was nothing they could do. But there was some in the town that thought this was a good thing that the Russians were there. They thought it was great having the Russians just move in, such as these two brothers who were police officers in the town, and they wanted the Russians to take over the entire Ukraine, and that they thought it was best for their country. And so they started claiming that they were Russian. And eventually, the Russians, of course, were run out of that village by the Ukrainian military. And at that point, the two brothers decided to go with the Russians, and they left. Now, in Russia, the brothers stayed in touch with the people back home, mostly friendly conversations about what was happening. But really what they were doing was they were looking for information to give to the Russians. And they built up this information network, finding out what was going on in the town, any information about the military. This past week, there was a funeral in a cafe there for a fallen Ukrainian soldier. One of the brothers that we were talking about just then had got that information about that funeral, where it was, what time it was at. And as it turns out, there was a person that was at that funeral that one of those guys really hated. So he turned all this information over to the Russians. And the son of the soldier that was killed, who had brought his father up from the south, wanted to be buried in their hometown, the whole family turned up for the wake and the funeral, and around 1 p.m. they all sat down for lunch at the cafe. 9 minutes into that lunch, a Russian missile was fired right into that cafe, killing 59 people. 6 people were wounded. Many of the people that died were complete families that were there. They just came to the funeral of that relative. All the people that died were civilians. But besides the family members that were killed, there were other people that were there just everyday customers, just wrong place, wrong time. The Russian ambassador said to the UN, "We wiped out neo-Nazis and the Ukrainian nationalists in that bombing." However, and then you can one of the relatives spoke out. "My dead brother was a farmer and a very simple guy. This is a small community. Everybody knows everybody. I couldn't go to the funeral that day because I was at work. Otherwise, I would be dead. Why did the Russians target civilians?" First thing he went on to say, "They're evil. They're killing us. It's all Russian propaganda. That's why the Russians hate us so much." But here again, some of these victims were small children who have grown up in a war, just like in Palestine. 0 military personnel were in that cafe, just family members.
So,
I know. We're really going dark today.
That's why sometimes you need to be careful when you're talking to somebody. Because sometimes that person is maybe getting some information, like what happened to that. Because they're these Russians are very smart. Of course, they will find a way to get information about what's going on. Where are where are they going? So they will find a way to get into, somebody to find, maybe to get some information. But look what happened after that. All right, so they killed. Imagine those are civilians.
Yeah, there was no military people in this.
Military people.
The only military person of the whole thing was the guy who was dead.
Yeah. So now,
who was the funeral for?
Bottom line here is this. They're your enemies. So they are also trained to kill. Because let's say if you're Russian and this is Ukrainian, so you guys are enemies.
But the point I guess I was trying to make was, isn't it interesting like how the people that caused this were 2 guys from that town, born in that town, grew up in that town, and then all of a sudden they thought, you know what, we would be better under Russian rule.
No.
In the United States, we have the same thing. People there, we would be better under Donald Trump's rule. In the same way in Gaza, we'd be better under the Hamas rule. And I'm sure there's people in Israel who believe in the Palestinian plight. And it's just, I find it fascinating sometimes, that how people think these days, and that these brothers would give information to the Russians to kill the people that they grew up with.
Yeah, that's the thing, because they were poisoned already. Their mind were poisoned already, but believing that, let's say Putin would be better leader. So it depends on the people that you talk to. Probably, I don't know if there is smart enough people.
I know, we make rules of war. We have rules. The UN, the United Nations, they make rules of war. You can't target civilians. Yeah, does anybody ever pay attention to these rules? And what happens if you break them?
Not anymore. They don't pay.
Nobody pays attention to these rules. Why do we make these rules?
You will always be the enemy. If you are on the, let's say, for Ukrainian and Russia, you will always be, especially during the war. No more friends.
Every time there's a war, it's like, well, you got to follow these rules. And then the first thing that one side says is, well, they did it. They did it, so we're going to do it. Yeah. They killed our children, so we're going to kill their children.
Yeah, it's going to go back and forth. So,
so as far as the rules of war,
we don't like that.
But I wanted, I just wanted to, because we've been talking so much about the Ukrainian war, and like I said, sometimes it does get a little tedious because it's almost the same thing, every week.
Yeah.
But this was I thought was an interesting story about these 2 brothers that grew up in the Ukraine. They grew up in that small town. Everybody knew them. Turns out one of the boys' mother worked in that cafe for like 4 years. So anyway, they've been charged with high treason and collaborators in the murders of their former neighbors and schoolmates. And so they can never return. They can never return to the Ukraine, or they will be taken. So, we keep going through these really hard stories today. But, this next one, I wanted to bring this up because I just thought it was so important this week, and it may have fallen through the wayside because we've had such other massive stories. But I wanted to talk about a group of people from about 65,000 years ago that migrated to Australia. They were intelligent, they had clans of hundreds of languages, and some believe they are one of, if not, the oldest species of humans outside of Africa, and they were known as the Aborigines. And they were split up into two groups, those that were Australian when the British came in 1788, and those who became Australian after the British were there, the people that came over from the Torres Straits. They had thought of, originally they came from Africa, and they took canoes from Africa into Asia, and then from Asia into Australia, like tens of thousands of years ago. And they were supposedly a very peaceful people. There was, 1.25 million of them spread out over Australia. But then the British came, they brought disease, they brought guns, and of course they killed many of the Aborigines, seized their lands. Later, between 1910 and 1970, the government was forcibly removed the Aborigine children from their homes and placed them in adoptive white families and forbid them to speak their native languages and adhere to British customs only, like drinking tea and eating crumpets. So they also changed all their names so they could not be found. Eventually, by the way, that group of children that were stolen from their parents, they were called the Stolen Generation. But in 2008, the Prime Minister made a formal apology for the stolen generations and said that they would try and fix the social discrepancies between indigenous and non-indigenous people, because right now I think there's 3% of the population in Australia are Aborigine. But it looked like they're slowly starting to disappear, so they wanted to be recognized as a nation. That's all they wanted to do, was be recognized as a nation, maybe get some compensation for all the land that was stolen from them. However, this week in Parliament they had a vote, and it was resoundingly rejected, the proposal to recognize the Aboriginal people for is in the Constitution as their own nation.
Well, because they are the minority. In every country, I think, if you are the minority, you will not really get the vote, whatever vote that you're asking for. And that is sad also for the Aborigines.
I think that the problem this week was they thought that they would just do it. I think that they thought, because who's it going to hurt? I mean, give the Aborigine people, it's like the United States and the American Indians. It's like the Philippines and the
it's either the Mangyans,
or the original people that are still prefer to live that style of life, like a lot of the Aborigines. They still want to live out in the wilderness. They want to shoot bow and arrows, and they want to keep their own culture. And it just seemed to me, here again, I'm not an Australian, but it just seems like I think that this was something that they could have done. I don't think it would have hurt that many people, because right now the people there, the Aborigines, are in the same way that they are in other countries, especially in the American Indian in the United States, or the original indigenous people here in the Philippines. They suffer from discrimination and poor health and bad economics. And right now the Prime Minister came out and said, this is a moment of disagreement. It will not define us. It will not divide us. We are not yes voters or no voters. We are Australians, and it's as this is Australians together that we must take our country beyond this debate, without forgetting why we had it in the first place. I don't know what that speech did for the Aborigines. I don't even understand how it supposedly will console them. But if you look back at the stolen lands and the rights of people, and the fact that their children were forcibly taken away from their parents and given to white families to repatriate into their society, I just think that maybe this would have been a pretty good gesture to go ahead and let them have, be able to call themselves a nation.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Well, that's the thing that we really don't understand sometimes. It's hard to fathom that. I don't know.
I mean, their life expectancy is 8 years less than their other compatriots. Their suicide rate is twice as much. They have poor outcomes in health, education, infant mortality. I can go on and on and on about how. But I mean, basically, I'm just repeating most countries' indigenous peoples.
It's still happening in the world, actually. But then sometimes you wonder, this is a modern world, we call it, but why is it that we still have those? Isn't it because it should really be part of the culture of that particular country?
Yeah, I mean, once the Aborigines are gone, I mean, like I said, it is possibly the oldest human origins ever outside of Africa. I mean, they were one of the first people to leave Africa, and they came to Asia, then they came to Australia. I think, the bloodline is slowly dissipating. Mm-hmm. And I think it's something that I just think that I think a lot of Australians were very dismayed by this vote. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The way it was presented, the way they presented it to the people, to try and make it so the way that they showed it was that, you should vote against this because it's not in your best interest. The majority. Uh-huh. So speaking of speaking of majorities, I didn't know if I was going to get to this or not. The majority in the U.S. Congress is Republican. This is the next big news story. Yes, we've been talking about Kevin McCarthy. He was voted in as Speaker of the House of Congress. However, in order to become Speaker, he had to make a deal with the Trump people. But the deal was that they could boot him out any time. Well, Lolly, I guess you know what happened.
He was voted out.
He was booted out.
Yeah.
So now, Steve Scalise, he's the new nominee for House Speaker. I would like to mention, I just want to talk about this because if he got to be Speaker, his name would be coming up a lot. However, many Republicans who were for Kevin were not for Steve. Steve Scalise, if we remember, we had talked about him before. I had to look back at the stories. He was part of that bunch that wanted to overturn the election, and then currently still refuses to admit that Joe Biden won the election. He was even asked one time if Donald Trump should take some responsibility for January 6th, which he would not answer. Anyway, Steve was voted in as the nominee. However, he could not get enough Republicans to win the speakership. Mm-hmm. You need 217 votes, and he couldn't get it.
Yeah, he gave up because
he gave up. Yeah. He's like, well, there's no point. There's no point trying to deal with these people. Which leaves who? Jim Jordan. Mm-hmm. You know how much we love Jim Jordan here on the show. We've talked about him quite a bit. He was one of the guys that wanted to be in the January 6th committee. However, they wouldn't let him in because he was one of the people they were investigating. So, in other words, you're not allowed to be on an investigation committee if you're the ones that they are investigating.
Of course.
Anyway, he's also a massive Trump supporter who pushed the big lie. But chances are he will never get to the 217 number of votes either. So the Republicans have been described as screaming monkeys throwing their poo at each other. And this is what's been going on now in the United States. 155 Republicans are backing Jim Jordan, who sent text messages explaining to Mark Meadows, the chief of Trump's chief of staff, how to overturn the election. Mm-hmm. That's the guy that they're picking.
Oh, my God.
So many Republicans have come out, Lolly, and said Jordan will never be the Speaker of the House. Words they are using to describe the Republicans are chaos, idiots, fools, embarrassing, dysfunctional, and I've already said before, monkey poo.
Oh, my goodness.
And these are Republican congressmen saying this.
Yeah, so what will happen now?
Nobody knows what's going to happen now.
Can Kevin McCarthy
Kevin McCarthy could come back as Speaker of the House, but supposedly there are that group of Trump supporters that will never vote for him. But I mean, Lolly, we're in the middle of the Ukrainian war.
I know.
Israeli war.
Yeah, and there's also Republican war.
I mean, yeah, and now there's a Republican more. There is a chance that the government budget will not get approved in November, and the government will shut down possibly
Oh my
again.
goodness. I hope they can resolve it on Tuesday. I don't know how they're gonna. I just don't know what if Trump just showed up and he wants to be the speaker of that.
I think they should make Donald Trump the speaker. Just because they even said it. Just because they even said it. But you know what's happening now? This is how dysfunctional the Congress has become in the United States. The Democrats are coming to the Republicans and say, hey, make a deal with us. Let a Democrat be Speaker of the House. That would never happen in the past. I mean, you know what we keep saying in the United States now? Never before have we ever seen anything like this.
What if? There's, because of that, situation right now with the Republican, can it be done if the Democrat would talk about it?
It is possible. It is possible. I can't believe it. I'm sitting here right now. If we come out back to the show a week from now and a Democrat is Speaker of the House, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Eric, remember, there's always, they say there's always first time. First time they voted out McCarthy.
First time.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's so many first time in the United States, so why not?
In the last, how many years, in the last 6 years, there's been so many first times. Never before have we ever seen anything like this.
Yeah.
And then next week, never before
have
we ever seen anything like that. One of the things, Lolly, that we have never before seen is a congressman like George Santos.
One of my favorite congressmen in the U.S.
He is a snappy dresser. We love George Santos here on the show because he's back in the news because he has been slapped silly with a bunch of new charges, including wire fraud, making false statements to the Federal Elections Commission, falsifying records, identity theft.
My God.
He took credit cards during fundraising, stole the numbers, and used donors' money to buy lavish clothes.
My God, what? Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. When I was reading that, I told myself, what?
I can't believe this. And there's this clip going around, which I just love, which is George Santos coming out of a Congress meeting, and reporters are all there saying, George, tell us about the new charges. What do you think about the new charges? This. And he's saying, I don't know anything about it yet because I don't have access to my phone.
Oh.
And at the time he's saying, I don't have access to my phone, he was talking on his phone.
What a liar. My God.
But this is, we're making fun of this, but George has 23 criminal counts against him.
Yeah.
I mean, he may be going to jail. He's blowing this off as like, this is just the Democrat. This is, 68 more counts and he'll be tied with Donald Trump.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that's why they are in the same party.
I know.
I mean, the qualification to be a Republican. No, I'm just kidding. But you need to have
it's hard to believe. I mean, I watched this. I thought George Santos was kind of done. Like the Republicans would kick him out, but they haven't kicked him out. They haven't kicked him out because they need that one vote. They only have 5 votes. They're only ahead in the Congress by 5. So they kick him out. That means they're only going to have 4. So they need to keep him in, but this stuff keeps happening, and other Republicans are like, listen, we need to get rid of this guy. Who cares that we're going to lose the one vote? He's making us look like a bunch of idiots. Not that they don't kind of already look like monkey poo or whatever we've been talking, but I think, this is one of the things that is hurting not only the Republican Party, but I mean, first thing, watching this from outside the country, this guy wearing purple suits.
You know that he's not a real man, so what do you expect?
I mean, he has so many different names, and, the fact that he was telemarketing for donors, getting their credit card information for his, campaign, taking the numbers, and then buying stuff online with their numbers.
Yeah,
it's just hard to believe that a politician who won a seat in Congress
because nobody knows. Nobody knows probably what he's doing before.
I know.
Before he became a congressman. So.
I mean, I am surprised that he slipped through the cracks because the Republicans are supposed to be so good at being able to look and see,
Yeah.
ahead of time, to be able to look at these people's past and find out, hey, wait a minute, is the name he's given us, is that his real name? Because it seems George Santos has many names that he has gone by over the years.
Oh,
So
sounds like Filipino.
I'm going to
like,
say,
you
do you
have
know
a
any
lot of-
Filipino politicians that have had stories like this
not
against them?
personally, but then I know some people who changed their name and they have different, different passport. I know, I watch it on a movie in the U.S. also, that they have if you're a gang, if you're a whatever, so you can have 5, 10 passport, different names.
I know. Well,
but
yeah, I know a lot of people here in the Philippines change their number all the time.
Oh, well, if
It's
you're
like
using
changing your identity.
Yes.
But speaking of things that we need to change, Lolly, we need to change us right now because we are out of time.
Yes.
We're at the end of the show, but we're going to be updating everybody next week on a lot of these stories that we've been talking about this week. So I know this was a very dark day for news, but hopefully next week things will start looking up a little bit better. But in the meantime, Lolly, we will see you next week here on the World News Jam. I'm Eric Lecain, along with Lolly Tolentino, here on DZRJ and RJTV. And we will be back next Sunday at 7 p.m., so please join us then. Everybody be safe out there, and we will see you next week.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the